It's Graphic Policy Radio, the comics podcast. This is your host, Ilana Levin, aka Ilana Brooklyn. And I get to interview two of my favorite creators in comics these days, Kieron Gillen and Stephanie Hans, who have a new comic out from Image called Die. Die is a pitch black fantasy where a group of 40-something adults have to deal with the returning unearthly horror that they barely survived as teenage role players. If Kieron's in a rush, she describes it as a, quote, Goth Jumanji that only captures a sliver of what you'll find in the oversized debut issue, which just came out this week, where fantasy gets all too real. But first, they want to wish everyone a happy Hanukkah, a holiday celebrated not just by yours truly, but also canonically celebrated by Ben Grimm, the ever-loving blue-eyed thing, Kitty Pryde, Batwoman, Ted Kord, both sets of Maximoff twins, and no retcon can take that away from me. Subtextually by Kal El, who you know as Superman, and if you read Alex DeCampi, Rostein, D. Cunniffe, and Ted Brandt's amazingly touching free fan comic Hell's Kitchen Movie Club, Hanukkah is also celebrated by Winter Soldier Bucky Barnes. May his mechanical arms WD-40 last for 8 extra days. Anyhow, this week we are talking about the new series Die. It really is one of the best new series I've picked up this year. Excited to introduce, welcome back to the show, Kieron Gillen. He is an award-winning writer based in London, Britain. He is best known as the co-creator of The Wicked Plus the Divine and Phonogram, one of my absolute faves. His comics work has been published by basically everyone, and he's written all of the Marvel superheroes you've heard of, and a few of you haven't. He's written extensively for Star Wars and is the co-creator of Doctor Aphra. Die is his latest ongoing comic. He mainly plays fighters with big mouths. And joining me for the first time is Stephanie Hans, an artist based in Toulouse, France. She is one of the most prolific and in-demand cover artists in the Anglophone sphere and has worked for all the major comic publishers. Her sequential work has been seen in The Wicked and the Divine, Spider-Man, Angela Journey into Mystery, and Batwoman. Die is her first ongoing comic. She mainly plays wizards with big swords. Welcome to the show, you guys.
Hello, love to be here.
Hello, happy Hanukkah.
Thank you. So I'm incredibly excited about this series because it combines some of my favorite things, which really includes playing role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games. Do you want to talk a little bit with our listeners about how you guys got started working on the series together?
Shall I take handles?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay, I mean, basically, in San Diego 2016, I was wandering around the mall they have there, eating ice cream with Jamie McKelvey, Ray Fawkes, and myself. And we were just riffing, you know? And I think somebody, I can't remember who, maybe me, it could have easily been someone else, said, whatever happened to those kids in the D&D cartoon? And so we started joking about them being middle-aged people horrified by the experience. And of course, there was actually Jamie, bless him and his Wikipedia knowledge, knew that actually they did actually get home. That was the thing. For people who don't remember the 1980s D&D cartoon, it's basically a group of kids go on a fairground ride and get transported to a D&D world and have adventures trying to get home. So I chewed that over, and the idea is nagging at me because I was looking to do something after, next after Wick did, really. And it nagged at me until, like, having dinner with, like, all the Image people that night, it kind of hit me why it was nagging at me, burst into tears, and immediately was like, oh right, I'm having a visceral emotional reaction to this comic idea. I know exactly why it has to be what I do next. And me and Stephanie were already talking about doing a book together. In fact, we were working on a couple of other ideas, like, floating around, but there's one thing I've never even shown Stephanie I was thinking about. And immediately it was like, no, this is what we should do. And I just mailed her saying, okay, this is what I want to do. Why are you up for this?
I used to work on fantasy books when I was in France, and I put it on the side for a while. I think I sent you a mail about it, like when we were talking about potentially working together, and you were like, oh, actually, that might be something that we could,
Yeah, it was exciting. And of course, we and Miss Stephanie, we met on Journey into Mystery, which is a book we did for Marvel about Kid Loki. And Stephanie did the vast majority of the covers. There were a few towards the end she didn't because there was a crossover. But like she absolutely sort of defined the visual entrance points of the book. And she actually drew the internals in the final issue. So ever since then, and that's one of my favourite things I ever did for Marvel, it was like, oh, it would be amazing to do a full book with Stephanie.
Yeah, actually, I had been nagging the editor at the moment to do a full issue at the moment or another. Like, this is actually, they gave me an Ant-Man before, but I was very happy to close the series.
It was pretty amazing, yeah. So that's kind of like the core of it.
That's really exciting. One of the things I was thinking about is we always talk about comics as a collaborative art form because it obviously is. And when I'm trying to explain to people who don't play role-playing games what the appeal of playing them is that it really is an exercise in collaborative storytelling. So I was thinking, how does that sort of fit together with you guys telling the story together? Does it have a connection to your experience role-playing? Is that something you think about as like the appeal of role-playing at all? Or the appeal of making comics?
I must admit, it's interesting. I mean, for me, it's like there is a long period of collaborative. I mean, I've been drawn to collaborative art forms all my life, and I would agree with you. I would include role-playing games in terms of the. It's like being in a band, but for storytelling. There's a metaphor. It's entirely. I've never thought that before, but that's kind of. Oh no, that's exactly what it is, isn't it? Let's form a band, and let's form a party, if you will. So there's definitely some crossover in our thinking. I mean, Stephanie talks about like, I'm the games master and she's the party. You said something like that once, didn't you?
That's true. I do a lot of gesticulation.
But like, it's very. I must admit, it's quite a different. One of the joys of comics is every different sort of relationship is very different. Like me and Jamie, it's like so much of the stuff is me having the core idea, not even the core idea, like the whole story. And Jamie has a veto, but Jamie's all about the execution. You know, it's like kind of like he's like the director and the rest of the cast, but I'm like the actual writing part is absolutely 100% like me. Whilst me and Stephanie, it's been much more fluid, and it's been this. My standard light is like collaborating with the ocean. As in, I do as much as I normally do, and I've done a lot of like research and world building and overthinking. Then Stephanie kind of riffs, and it's like this real, and she brings so much back in, which I then have integrated, and it's really twisted the book in like fundamental ways. Like, there's at least two of the core cast who have changed conceptually in a very real way, and some of it's like about a year ago, wasn't it? You came out, like we're in my house at the moment. Last time Stephanie stayed at my house, and we spent a lot of time talking about like our experiences of fantasy.
Oh yeah, you had a notebook and you were noting things actually.
Yeah, I was asking like, so tell me about like your experience with fantasy as a teenager. So like, there's certain characters who have got like stuff like it's always autobiographical with me and people I've known, but I kind of wanted to have stuff from Stephanie's life as well in there. So yes is the answer to the question.
That's true that I came with a lot of things that you certainly didn't expect. Like, it was sending me stuff and I was like, oh yeah, and what does it mean? And does that even exist in that book? And I don't want to say too much because it might be spoilery, but, you know, I came with a lot of questions that I don't know if you asked yourself those questions before.
It's tricky. I mean, there's definitely some questions. I mean, for me, writing is a process of discovery. I mean, like, I was about to say I'm quite a good interviewee, and that's like egotistical nonsense. But like, I always remember, like, I read something about Chuck D, and Chuck D always practiced every single interview question. And at some level, interviews for me are a way of me rethinking about what the book's about. So, in other words, I've thought about any logical questions someone might ask me about a book. And so, in other words, the process with Stephanie in terms of like the interrogation of what we're trying to do is really useful. I mean, kind of, and it's quite interesting. Like Stephanie, there's so much. I mean, kind of like even before Die existed, part of my whole thing I wanted to do a fantasy book with Stephanie was the world really needs a Stephanie Hans fantasy universe. In that kind of like and part of Die is, you know, it's a book. I've talked about the D&D cartoon earlier, and it's not nothing at all like that.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah. As in that's the core inspiration, but we've taken it somewhere completely different. But at least part of it is there's going to be some people having a very nostalgic relationship with it because it's a fantasy game, and it was quite important to me. No, this is a fantasy world you probably haven't seen before.
But
yes.
Also, the thing is, neither of us are nostalgics, fundamentally, so...
Yes. I mean, actually, one person's review about it picked up the original word of nostalgia had a kind of much more... If you go out to the Greek, apparently nostalgia had a much more concept of sadness to it. So, you know, Die is a pretty... In the Greek sense, Die is very nostalgic. It's about, like, sadness and difference and, like it's not even wanting to be back there, but aware of the sadness of time. But Die was quite important to me. We're going to this fantasy world, and it's not just a load. Whilst it is absolutely a deconstructionary book that examines things from many different angles, it's also this is a unique fantasy world you have not seen before, and it's going to like the way Stephanie draws the dragon is not like a standard dragon. The idea, like I often talk about Planetary in terms of like one of the great joys of Planetary as a book was how it kind of took all these kind of things that made up superhero comics, and as well as talked about them, it kind of reminded you why they were interesting in the first place. I mean, like. And that's kind of like, obviously we haven't seen much of the fantasy world in the first issue, but that's definitely kind of our intent.
Well, with building the fantasy world, like you guys have quotes from J.R.R. Tolkien in the back. And that's so funny to me because, I also know that this is so specifically trying to have a fantasy world that is not just a replay of like what has become a really basic J.R.R. Tolkien locked in amber tendencies in fantasy. So like specifically with Stephanie, even like how are you conceive of building a fantasy world that is something we haven't seen before and isn't just like the same, homage?
Well, I don't know if I can really answer this question. Most of it comes from the desire to make something that looks real and tangible. One of my favorite artists as a fantasy artist was John Howe. And he was actually in my school, like way before me, but still. And I always appreciated the fact that when he was doing G.R. Tolkien illustration, all the thing he did had a sense of dignity and something that looks, it wasn't cheesy. I don't know if that means something, but this is what I want to do. I want to create something that's not cheesy.
I mean, a lot of the world building just comes from not doing what Tolkien's doing.
Right.
And like I tell you, it's like issue 3 actually is I've got a lot of quotes. And obviously, since we've got a quote on the back, there's going to be a lot of quotes across the whole series. So choosing which one of these many quotes to stick on the back cover was kind of quite difficult. Like the fact that issue 3 we finally actually do it. Like issue 3 is a very weird deconstructionary Tolkien issue, and it's nothing at all like any fan. It's not like a Middle Earth issue is another way of putting it. It's me kind of trying to. Part of my research, I've got a big pile of Tolkien books to my right, is actually coming to terms of Tolkien. Because I, for quite a while, have been angry with Tolkien. As in, people used to say about Journey to Mystery, there's a very kind quote by Doug Walk, saying that Journey to Mystery was the most affectionate killing of fathers he'd read. And and that kind of, as opposed to the usual, you're not my dad kind of angry kind of relationship. It was kind of, I was like playing with Moore and Gaiman and whoever, and generally just teasing, and I felt quite good about myself in terms of how there's a lack of rage beneath that. I said, oh yeah, I definitely came from there, but so what? And then I found myself thinking about Tolkien. And I know I'm angry with Tolkien. As in, I was angry, like, if you get me riffing on elves, it's pretty brutal.
Yeah.
These this kind of master race, and the very awareness I would be an orc, in Middle Earth. Very clearly, I'm an industrial, like, working class person. I would be an orc. So kind of all that is very clear to me with Tolkien. But actually doing the research of Tolkien, I've made peace with him. Like, I've forgiven him in that way. As in, he was kind of writing from the place he came in. He can't, when they got more into the biography, it was like, there's no way Tolkien, whose experience of cities is basically, oh, my mum died there. He cannot.
Oh God.
You know what I mean? As in, like, so I completely. At Tolkien as a human being, I saw him as a human being and kind of got him. And I'm like, whilst I still can sort of pick apart the influence, I think I ended up being a lot more fonder of him. And that's kind of what the story is, in some degree, about. Anyway, so that's not the whole story. That issue.
Sure.
And I picked that as one example, and that's kind of the deconstruction. I'm really talking a lot. I'm sorry. The deconstruction aspect of like Die just kind of do that. You have these spotlight issues that kind of drill down into things that made fantasy happen. Like, there's a bit about the Prussian military war games, like the Kriegspiel, if you know that. And there's a bits about the Brontes, and there's kind of various of it. Like H.G. Wells weirdly has a very big role, because H.G. Wells was obviously instrumental in the growth of hobby games. So, and it's all over the place, which is kind of the fun. And that's at least trying to get mythology that grows from the mythology of RPGs and kind of becomes its own kind of thing, leads to so much about this, what we need to make. Does that make any sense? In other words, the fact it's literally set on a D20, and okay, what do we do? How do you actually conceptualise a D20 world? And kind of riff from there.
Well, it's so funny because I was like literally talking with a mutual friend of ours who just recently started playing RPGs as well, and we had this moment where we're like, wait, I'm sorry, are we talking about class or are we talking about class, right? It's impossible to talk about role-playing games without in terms of the characters you're building without saying, okay, well, what's their class? But then it's so rare that they acknowledge that this is like a really essentialist way of talking about like social class in a society. And one of the things I loved about this comic is one of the very first pages, you literally have a character commenting, we're playing our game at Saul's house because he has more than one bathroom. And I love the the class consciousness within this fantasy comic / based in reality comic too.
Yeah, that's. I was when when you start talking about class, I knew you were going to pick up on that. It's like, and I'm very glad, because if anybody's going to get what that caption was about, it's Alana, you know. So yeah, absolutely, it's that kind of there's a lot about Di in terms of what we're trying to, at least what I'm trying to write a bit more honestly. It's a lot about where I came from, and it's I'm from Stafford, you know, so I'm quite, the characters aren't me, but there's a lot of stuff which I know and experienced and thought about. I mean, it's one of those things that, you know, I quite like that people are retiring the word race from RPGs. Like, if you read old RPG manuals, the word, you know, you start looking at the idea of races, like the evil races, and you start thinking, that's not only, you don't even need to start trying to unpack that. That's just immediately, oh right, that's that we can see exactly what you're saying there.
I've seen people starting to wonder which one of the character you were supposed to be.
Yeah, I tell you, that's an interesting. Because I mean, it was Stephanie's idea to make Dominic be a sensitive metalhead, and I would never, like, that's a one. Do you want to talk about that?
It was too close to home for you, right?
Yes, it was. It's like the fact that, you know, as I was a sensitive metalhead when I was a teenager, I wouldn't have made like Dominic that.
Yeah, you know, it's just some kind of character that I've known when I was young, and it's kind of sad that you don't see them a lot more, at least in comics or like pop culture, literature, or, you know, because those people existed, and they were the kind of real romantics of my time.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like Stephanie was telling me. It's like you always see like the Bill and Ted and the Wayne's World sort of idea of a metalhead, and it's not, you know, if you're talking about the '90s metalhead, it's as much as the guy who's like painted all the Iron Maiden art on the side of his art folder.
So many of them.
You know that guy, and it's like, and that's such a, especially with comics, that's a very comics kind of archetype. So it was really that's a really useful thing about like Stephanie talking about collaboration. But yeah, there's a lot of like, what is fantasy for? I mean, going back to the class thing, but the idea of what is fantasy for is kind of hard baked into Die. I mean, there's a lot about role playing games per se, and obviously we're talking about like role playing game as a technology, as an infective technology. But as I said, by examining where it comes from, we can talk about essentially a lot about how fantasy works in the wider sense as an old concept to imagine things. So that's kind of what Die's about. But and the RPGs for me are an amazing sort of like prism to view through that. And as I said, but at the same time, sorry, as in we're putting them push and pull between that very serious aspect at the same time as trying to make a new working living fantasy. That's what part of the real interesting tension of Die. And kind of we talk about like the character classes like Godbinders and whatever, very clearly commentary upon bits of D&D, but at the same time they are fantasy people can buy into, and they're kind of like the tension there is really very important for us.
Well, talk about designing the cast, because you know you're in this case you're essentially designing the cast 3 times. You're designing the cast as young people, you're designing the cast as their roles that they're playing in the RPG, and then you're designing them as older people. So you're basically designing the cast 3 times over. How did you guys develop the characters together, especially considering there's 3 different phases of their being?
Wow, that's really tricky. Do you want to talk about the visual side first? And I'll think, seriously, like, because the characters are... You talk about the visual side, and then I'll come back.
I basically didn't want to overdo them while in the real world part, you know. I just wanted to make them very real. It's about connection. I have a lot of connection with all the characters, and even though sometimes I don't like them, I try to understand them. You know.
Yeah, no, me too. I agree.
Yeah.
Like all my characters, I come like I want to beat up a bit.
Yeah, there is one I specifically refer to him as the man spreader. You know, each time we talk about him, but I don't like him, and I love him. You know, it's like. When you have children, you pretend you always love them the same way, but you don't. And oh, I shouldn't say that, right?
It's like you never admit it, and you can tell that me and Stephanie don't have kids.
Oh wow! But the counterparts in the game, they have very strong visual. But you know, it's like when you think about yourself when you're designing your own character. Of course, you kind of overdo it, and all their designs come in a way from the way they designed them. While in the 90s when they were teenagers, so I'm pretty sure they wouldn't do it the same way if they had to do new characters now. But this is how they were, and this is how they stay. You know, and if you can pick the influences, I don't know if I should talk about it right now, but there are some of them that are very very.
I think we talk a little bit. I mean, it's like, especially because there's some stuff issue 2, but like the initial visuals you certainly see. It's stuff like when you see Chuck, I mean, this is one of Stephanie's idea. Like, obviously, you know Chuck as a character, as in he's deliberately aggressively shallow, and of course, aggressively shallow is an interesting character, as in for people, you know, and especially when he's surrounded with people who are much more grounded.
I don't know what that says about me that I put him in a hipster skin.
You do, no, but you know the fact it says "player" across his back of his jacket,
Yeah.
which I'm not sure is not that's only visible on issue 2's cover, I think. But
no, I saw it internally. Yeah.
But that's that was Stephanie's idea, and I laughed out loud. It's like no, that's beyond perfect.
Because it's obnoxious. Yeah, it's also there are a lot of things coming in the influence of the character. Like certainly one of the most evident was George Michael.
Oh yeah, literally the Faith video. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's like there was especially we were about a little bit with the world building, but I was very explicit. What would a precocious if Sol, being an extremely precocious 16-year-old, if he was designing a fantasy world trying to be adult in 1991, what would he do? You know what I mean? And there's a lot of that, and you see that in the characters, and you said the George Michael's a really good example, and the kind of the Femi Eddie the Head of Ash is really interesting. I think
we went through a lot of process through this character, because at first, since I designed him as a metalhead, I wanted his counterpart to be literally at least half the Eddie the Head. He literally had half the head of Eddie the Head. We kept a bit of
Eddie
it,
from Iron Maiden. You mean
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Iron
yeah.
Maiden mascot?
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. So you see, he kept the white hair, and the face is changing while he used the powers.
Yeah. I think Stephanie originally kind of wanted it to be all the time like Hela, as in kind of half like monstrous Ed of the Head and the other half that. And I'm like, for various reasons of the theme, I kind of like. I thought no, when Ash uses the powers, that kicks in and it's quite interesting. You get the kind of like, oh yeah, that's. There's one of my favourite lines in Bill and Ted is our album covers totally lied to us, dude, when they arrive in hell. And I'm like, with Ash, no, the album covers didn't lie in any way. It's all real. All the album covers are real. But like aesthetically, like 1991, especially the end of 1991 where it's set, this is like kind of the birth of the 90s, really. Because like Nevermind has literally come out. Vampire the Masquerade, the RPG, has literally come out. The Iron Curtain has fell. So like the end of the Cold War. You know, all these, it's this kind of liminal state, and whatever the 90s were, this very weird, like, short period between, like, weirdly blessed, like, I look back, there's sort of, how incredibly lucky those children were, including myself, to grow up in this, like, weirdly safe time. Like, and I know that's speaking extremely broadly, shall we say. Like, compared to, for example, now.
Yeah.
So I was trying to, like, capture a lot of that in the world, and this, of course, speaks to the characters. But in terms of, like, those 6 core characters across those, there's about, of course, compare and contrast with Wiccan Divine. Wiccan Divine is like 12 to 14 lead characters. Like Laura's the main one, and by far is the most complicated, and the rest have their own arcs, but they're kind of arcs in support of Laura's journey. With Die, we have these 6 main characters, and they are all, I mean, Ash is a narrator for the most of it, but they are much more complicated characters, as in they kind of have at least, each one had, in Wickdiv, they kind of had one main axis. You know, Bowl's story is about his relationship to pride and masculinity, and what you should do, what is actually justified, and how people internalise masculinity. The Die characters kind of have 3 or 4 each. You know, each of them are kind of like pulling, and trying to setting them up as in, okay, where they were then and what they kind of got now. That is the real, you know what I mean? That's the kind of the fun of him, and that's the reason why you get the characters. Like someone like Isabel. Like Isabel's, at least the primary axis you see in the first issue is like how she's like, you know, this button pressing, rude, edgy kind of person, you know, and that's quite hard in terms of she's actively homophobic in the opening scene, and I'm not the sort of person who likes dropping slurs for the sake of it, but like kind of how could I be like, and she is sharply homophobic, but in a way, and she's done it in a way which also speaks to the kind of the imaginative nation of her character. So like, and it sort of slips by a bit, but will still be kind of very clearly. And then you meet her in the present day, and she's fucking regretful. And that kind of, I was a shithead back then. And that was really, and the idea of like regret, as I used to be a really bad person. And trying to make amends. At the same time, she's still sharp. You know, and it kind of, you get these bits that pop, and that's kind of, you can show how that changed. I mean, kind of.
And she's also French, which is like, yes. I was thinking if that was a Stephanie.
Absolutely. No, it's like, so, like when we're having the conversation about she has got stuff which 100% comes from Steph. Not actually that. I'm not saying Steph. That stuff was kind of there already, but the other side of her, and those are kind of other threads which kind of come out, are very much like in Stephanie, and that kind of, there's reasons why she's pissed off with people, and that's kind of definitely stuff which kind of comes from the conversations me and Stephanie had.
And also think about like the relationship. I mean, and this is not a spoiler because it's right up in the earliest part of the comics. Like, you're also writing a character who's lost an arm, and like, how do you do that in a way that isn't going to be messed up? Is a real question. I
mean, like the consult. I mean, we took some consultancy on it as with Sally, who I'll be talking about Sally. I think in issue 3's back matter, but it was one of those kind of like talking to her. And there's a kind of when I am doing stuff about not my own experience, like there's a difference between my basic take on representation and like if you were telling a story, you telling a story featuring a character who had that experience, not making it that experience. Mm-hmm. In other words, like in the same way, like in Wicked Divine, Cassandra is a trans woman, and she, and that absolutely impacts everything that happens to her in the story. But it's not a story about her being a trans woman.
Right.
In the same way, this, despite being the experience where she lost an arm, like her story is not defined by it, but it's 100% shaped by it. And that's kind of like when I'm talking to Sally in terms of like, okay, what sort of stuff should we be thinking about? How should this impact be? But at the same time, it's not a story about like that specifically. Does it make sense? I said it's definitely okay. It impacts it on every single level, and in fact, and it clearly like impacts Ash because Ash definitely thinks about it, and him and Angela have never been able to talk about it. That's one of the tragedies in the book. But how it actually impacts Angela is in a very different way because it's kind of like how to phrase this. It's something that's impacted her life in enormous ways, clearly. But on the list of her problems in her life,
it's not the top.
Yeah, exactly. She's got. I mean, she gets this very long this section where she meets Dominic having drinks, and it's like, oh yeah, her life is a complete fucking mess right now. And that's kind of like the core stuff of her. I think is that. But like I said, they're complicated people. There's a lot in terms of like one of the last minute redraws we did was after talking to Sally was making sure that when she appeared in the first issue, she's very aware of the hand again. And the kind of and the expression she's got as she's looking at her hand is very much like it is a mixed and complicated feeling she's having about that.
Right, because she has having her like I joke like wrote her like her metal prosthetic magical cybertech arm again there.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's complicated. But
yeah, when I designed her like in the real world, I didn't really want to give her a prosthetic. I think like she did some work on herself, and she doesn't feel the need because I don't know if it would be really like useful more than painful to wear, because the arm is cut quite high, and so she did the work on herself to be comfortable with it.
And you also are painting the characters when they're older, and there's a lot of artists in comics who really struggle with depicting the same people at different ages in their lives, and I thought that this was you did an amazing job of
Oh, thank you.
Look of aging people appropriately, especially to like the right level. Like how how do you approach that?
It's quite difficult, but it's very instinctive, to be honest. I try to relate to each character, and they all have it's more about body language, honestly, than really design. Like, I try to know them, and, because I'm also in my 40s, I kind of, I've been through this, and I've seen my friends changing, in a way. It's just about remembering.
It's definitely something in the book we've worked all these issues we've worked on, like issue 2, we have ended up basically paying Clayton twice over. It got relettered so much, in that kind. And like Stephanie is like, said she's done amazing stuff, but we've always been like bits. Oh no, that's not quite right. We're gonna have to retweak it. That like the book is always being tweaked as well. So it's like it's got Stephanie's worked really hard on it, and then we've kind of stepped back and go, actually, we could be better. So like, I mean, but that's me for the writing as well.
Yeah,
like,
no, but it's okay. Yeah. Like, I really don't mind it. Like, we all work as a team, and that's
absolutely.
good.
Are you painting digitally somehow, or on paper, or?
Oh, I left the paper ages ago, at least for interiors. Once in a while,
Yeah.
I did covers in traditional, not for this, not yet at least. But no, I'm more comfortable with digital for interiors.
Because when I had you did a commission for me at a con a number of years ago, and it was done on paper, and I was just astonished at how fast you were able to make something so beautiful. I have an image of Sarah right on my wall. Absolutely, one of the best superhero comics characters of all time. But I was just stunned.
Thank you so much.
I'm like, how can you do this so fast? This is wizardry. So Solomon, who's the kid who's being the dungeon master in the story, when he offers the new game at the start of the party that kicks off, the birthday party that kicks off the series, he describes it as being, quote, fantasy for grown-ups. And Ash, our protagonist, says, we were deluded enough to think that's what we wanted. So since this new series is also described as fantasy for grown-ups, what does that mean to us?
I was supposed to say, I think that's the only sort of question. Seeing Elizabeth Sanderfire, who did the first review of Die, actually, she noted it's definitely the moment when Kieron states the theme in terms of if you haven't been paying attention, this is what we're doing and this is what we're unpacking. That's what I think we're going to discover along the way. It's like, what does any of that mean? And for me, what immediately attracted to me was with Die we get to compare these teenage fantasies with whatever your adult life ending up. Where was the gap? What did you learn? What did you gain? I mean, one of us, that's part of me. I've said earlier about the characters. So much for me is about that in terms of what these characters were then. I've mentioned Isabel in terms of I was awful. How can I ever make amends for how I used to be? Then you've got someone like Matt's interesting because Matt was obviously very depressed, and Matt is in a much better place now. He went for the grief night when he was, but now he's not that person. He's not the depressed teenage boy. Forced to go back and wrestle that again. That's not something he ever would want to happen.
Who would want that?
Yeah, exactly. So all that is then, I guess, isn't there? So that's kind of what does even fantasy for grown-ups mean? I'm interested. I said earlier, it's about fantasy as a genre and fantasy as in role-playing games, but it's also the basic concept of imagining. This as an evolutionary thing humans do, and the entire concept of the fantasy genre is this weird extended hypermutation, like a crest, like it's a peacock's tail. That's also as far as I've best researched, the ability to imagine is about being able to see things that might hurt you or whatever. Imagining possible futures which could possibly kill you. And the same way, we have used that and we've spanned that off like a peacock into this wonderful let's imagine entirely better worlds to a level where we can absolutely step back from reality into and live in fantasy if we wanted to.
That's
an amazing metaphor. I love it. That's great.
It's really interesting.
Yeah,
there's a great quote by Tolkien.
Animal psychology, I love it. Whatever. Yeah.
That's absolutely. This is 100% the stuff which is all. The thing about Die, it's a lot. It's we could have just done it as a really people go to a fantasy world and have these 6 characters have the emotional journey with them. That would have been a really good comic. And me and Stephanie have just put a lot I'm not even sure that's a good thing. It's I'm
excited. I want to know, when can I play this game? When am I going to get to play the RPG that you guys literally created for the purposes of making this comic?
It's we didn't have to make it, but we couldn't help ourselves. At least I couldn't. Yeah. The current, basically, as part of the game, it's definitely quite weird because sometimes it's which is the dog and which is the tail, that kind of thing. And it moved between periods when I was working intensely on this game part and then piece on the actual comic. And in practice, they've ended up being this sort of weirdly symbiotic thing. They've sort of grown closer and became this singular weird statement. Part of me is thinking Die is less formalist than Wicked is, and in terms of what we do in the comics, as in it's kind of it's a natural storytelling mode more. And I was like, well, where's the formalism gone? And of course, the formalism and the fact we've got an entire 50,000 word RPG system hanging off the side.
That's true.
But the plan was I wanted to release it around issue 1. Actually, my original plan was release it in the back matter, in parts. But after I did all this work, I realized it's not gonna, in its smallest part, it's not gonna fit in the back. So okay, what I'll do is release it circa issue 1. Then I realised there's too many spoilers in the what I wanted to release for issue 5 and 4. So it's okay. What I've actually going to hope to do, and this is not 100% definite, is release it as a free PDF circa issue 5 or when the trade comes out. Because basically what the RPG does in its present state is basically lets you play through your version of the first arc. When I say your version, I mean radically different. As in, it's not like you go through the same dungeon or anything. The game is about a way to generate a fantasy adventure for any group of any social group you conceptualize, if that makes any sense. So like what you actually do in the game is you generate your group of people who know each other, and then you drag them into the game, and then they go for this adventure, which is entirely tailored to their own hopes and fears and insecurities. That's the idea anyway. And so
you have to do the work of the illustrator and do double design for just one game.
It's not. Sorry, it's like I really wanted to do like something. Wick did is incredibly me, but with Die I wanted to go even further, to just a ludicrous degree, which is, I think, to the level where if I talk about it, I'm very aware that sort of like pure comics people listening going, "Wes, this sounds too much for me," and it's like that's kind of part of the fun of Die for me. In that, you can just read it like Narnia, as in they go to a fantasy world, but there's also got there's so much other stuff to it. If you want to go deep, it will reward you. And I'm very aware there's so much stuff in the game and the world we will never touch in the comic. I mean, so give me a random example. The concept of the Grief Knights. That's 1/8 of the actual knight classes. There's another there's another seven sorts of knights in the game world, and we've just picked one which is thematically appropriate. So if
I just really want to play this RPG. For the record, I would spend money. You don't need to give this away for free. I would buy it.
What we're gonna do is like a game master screen.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's
and
so fun.
This way we can actually print the rules on one side and just a nice art stuff on the other side.
I am thinking about it's the PDF, actually also doing a print edition at the same time. But what I would ideally, after it comes out, I would in the back matter of the issue, do more pick extra stuff every issue along the way, and then when Die is over, do a big hard edition. If people actually like it, we'll go by the time we get the end.
I really want to do a campaign.
It'd be so good.
Yeah.
Literally, because the game, actually, the stuff in the basic stuff I give out, whilst I say this is a one-off, and you don't really play it across multiple sessions if you want to, so it's not like a one-off, but everything in the actual game will give you is going to be able to give you much more than you actually need to do that. So in other words, people will be playing it as a campaign anyway. I'll say, it's not proofed, but people will be able to go off and do it. And the great joy, of course, you release it, and then if we do a fancy edition, it's been play tested properly. I mean, I've done a bunch of play tests already. I think it's 7 or 8 play tests so far.
Yeah, we played it.
Yeah.
You're a very good game master.
Thank you. Me and Stephanie, we ran it the day after New York Comic Con. And we got some people together, and we were obviously all tired. It was me. Who was there?
There was Jody.
Yeah, Jody Hauser. There was Towson from Critical Role. There was Tia from Comixology.
I was there too.
Yes, and Stephanie. And I ran a game in it, like the short form compressed game, and it worked really well. It climaxed in this ludicrous battle where Enormous works up. There was a Truth crawls out of her well, fighting an army of Instagram photos in a way which I had no idea how we got there.
And in any games that I play, I burned the whole thing down.
There's a lot of fire. That was fun. But it's also the thing about
wow.
I'm
really jealous.
It's so fun, and the thing is, it's a manual. It's I don't know about you, but I really as a kid, I really liked game manuals, and it's me writing a game manual. There's, even if you don't like you don't have any interest in games, there's a lot of essays at the back about narrative structure and how you create stories and what actually makes people interested in things. So I think people will be able to read it and just get a giggle anyway. If you're my writer's notes and all that kind of stuff I do extra, it's kind of like a 50,000 word writer's note. and it's if people like my writing, they should like it as an object, because I think it's pretty funny.
That's great.
It's funny, but it's long.
It is long. But it's generally, my plan is to get it to a place by Christmas. I want to actually get to a place where I can give it to people. As in, only I've run it. Here is the stuff explained well enough. Take it away, and you can run it. So I'll be giving it to a small group of my friends who I trust to go and give me some feedback and see how they get on.
That's fabulous. I really think it's exciting to have sort of this meta textual game that's happening as well. And I'm also I'm really hungry for RPGs that aren't mathy, and I suspect that this is not mathy.
It's Okay.
Well, if it's for me, there is always too much math implied.
High five.
That's right. There's more mathy than some systems, but there's much less mathy than other systems. As in, like, I've done a lot about.
That doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't.
No,
like,
I mean it's in the middle. Okay.
It's like kind of there's a. There, I don't want to try how to phrase it. I'm desperately adverse to the concept of addition. As in, like, almost everything in the system I've done is basically to avoid people adding two numbers together, which is something that bugs me. Because, like, especially, like, people are tired of had a few beers. Like, I'm pretty good at maths, so I'm okay. But definitely when my friends, if they're forced to add two numbers together at 11:30 after 3 beers, that's not something that's easy to do. So, like, there's so much about the game which is about, like, the game, I used to be a games journalist, so stuff I've learnt from game design in terms of, like, what people use objects and how people think. There's a lot in there. But it's not a narrative game. Like, There's definitely enough maths there. Not maths. There's enough rules there to make it work like a classical RPG. And the one thing I haven't done is, like, there's a trend in modern RPG style where the player facing, it's called, basically where only players make rolls, which I haven't done because since die is about the question of reality. If you make only players be real, by definition, the world they're in isn't real. So I've had to. So whilst I've kept it very simple, I've also had to simulate the monsters. Like, yeah,
it's a bit like in Feng Shui, or basically you have extra points if the thing is spectacular enough.
Yeah. It's like there's a lot of stuff in there, and also I tell you what I am doing is all the character sheets have a front sheet, which is basically the basic not standard RPG stuff, but what my version of it. And then you have a second sheet. And if you're playing the basic game, you have one second sheet. And if you're playing a fancier game, you have a second, more complicated sheet with more options in. So, like, whoever's running the game can tailor it depending how they want to do that. So, which is quite a fun thing to do.
Well, I was also thinking about developing a balanced cast, like you guys were building, multiple characters for the main core cast of the series. It's sort of like developing a balanced party, right? Like, how are you going to have the people who can do the kinds of tasks that need to happen? And, like, sure, you can have an all-barred party. My friend has done that. But most of the time, people won't do that. So, yeah, I guess I was sort of thinking about that sort of connection, like having a system where you're able to have people who can do all the things that need to happen, but you're also developing characters that'll play off each other well in the story.
There's definitely kind of lots of stuff in the game, like, as well as the personality sides of the game, there's also there's a degree of inter-party, not conflict is the wrong word, but tensions, as in different character classes kind of, quote-unquote, need different things. As in, like, the Godbind ends up having to make deals with gods, for example. And, like, well, if you make a deal with a god, like, how does that going to end up? And, if that kind of stuff. And especially when the rest of the party maybe don't want to do it. So that's one side. So there's all different levels of conflict. But the part of the design was also each class being flexible enough to be played in different ways. So you could genuinely, like, the Neo is abstractly clearly roguey. That kind of, like, but you could completely do a Neo build which is like the Terminator. If you wanted to go that way. And then also the level of difficulty. There's some classes like the Dictator who are really quite, not hard to play, but demanding to play. Like, they involve more emotional complexity and, explicitly the game suggests not giving the Dictator if you just trust someone's emotional maturity, don't give them the Dictator.
Yeah, and there are several levels too. I very often mention the fact that I thought about them as Pokemons.
Yes.
There's different levels of evolutions.
Yeah. The Godbind is quite because it's quite a high, that's like middle high. And then you've got the other side, the Fool. And the Fool is explicitly a class designed for somebody who just wants to be like Chuck. Not like be like Chuck, but like, play it like, as in you've got less rules. There's lots of stuff, and you don't need to emotionally commit to the game in the same way. In some ways, if you actually emotionally overcommit, it causes problems with the Fool for reasons too. So you can play it like a very sophisticated role player, and it's also like an easy mode for player, and it's really quite easy to do, and there's much less not maths, but there's less stuff to worry about. Does that make sense? So I there's all these kind of things I've been thinking about, and like as a game, there's so much about the fetishism of the dice, and obviously that's in Die,
yes.
But like. It's like every player basically owns one dice, and only they get to touch it.
Just so wild. Well, one of the things I noticed in the character designs, right, is that the Fool, like he gets the how many 8-sided the standard dice,
D6.
And he's wearing that. Sorry, thank you. Math and I are not friends, and which is again fights back to why I ended up playing bards a lot. But like. He has that die as an earring, and I was started to look back at the images and saying, "Oh, are other people's dice on their person in some visible way?"
Yes, they all are. Like, that's the you can't really see it in issue 1, can you? But
but I will be able to.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, you could probably guess where, like, Ash's is.
Actually, Matt's is certainly the most difficult.
Yeah, Matt's quite hard to see, actually.
And Angela, you sort of have to guess it because you don't see it.
Yeah. As you can work it out. So actually, in the actual game, the fall is quite fun because, the fall is abstractly a normal dice. As in, most of the game runs off d6s. As in, it's a dice pool system. You roll a d6, 4 plus is a success. Sorry, 4 plus is a success. But like, what you do if everyone else has got this fancy, they own this very fancy looking dice. But as a 4, you get to draw on your dice. So in other words, you get to change the numbers and cheat.
Oh my god!
Which is like, and generally the fall is it's a bit like, I'm a naughty, and it's a weird foot of being a naughty boy. That kind of like that sort of cheerful vandalism to it. Yeah, that's a fun mechanic.
Wow, that's probably what I want to do. Even though I actually I get really emotionally invested, but I'm not good at rules and details, and I think that would be a really great class for me to play. So thank you for answering my next question.
I'm sorry, you would enjoy Godbinder as well. Godbinder, you actually have conversations with the gods. So in other words, like if you want the god to do something, it's like you suddenly have to start chatting to the god of light or whatever. And in the actual game, I end up like customizing you get to customize who your gods are. The last game we played, like there was the god. It was slightly tongue in cheek, but it was like a rock and roll god of the wild called Steppenwolf.
Yeah.
So I was basically pretending to be a 1970s rock star, and I do this thing where I actually stand behind the player when playing a god. So I sort of whisper in their ear. So you never actually get to see the god, but you're going to hear their voice. So that's quite a, if you like just the role playing of it, like there is some stuff, but that kind of, I now get to play with these NPCs and try to talk them into doing something. It's good stuff.
That's an amazing way to do it. I like things that are more driven by interpersonal interactions and like relationships and improvisation. That's amazing. I also was working on something where we had like literally the god of partying. Like,
Awesome.
was like what sort of like looks like Andrew WK, but also the floating wolf head from Adventure Time, who's the god of parties on that world. But anyway, that's freaking cool. I want to get into this. How many issues are we getting?
We don't. I don't like saying how long something is.
But it's ongoing.
It's ongoing. It's like a short ongoing, as it's not as long as Wictive, but it's not like. It's not like 12 issues, shall we say? It's okay. It's like a bunch of trades. Like I'm gonna say about half the size of Wictive, and like the issues are longer than Wictiv's as well. So like 5 issues are basically the equivalent of like 6 normal issues. That's
true, and we get so much lovely painting in it. I was so struck by the spread that Stephanie did, where you have the diagonal slashes of panels of where everybody is getting their character class assigned to them based on the kind of person they want to play, and like they get their dice assigned, and you have these really warm panels, which is them in the room, in the bedroom, in the reality, and then the cool toned one of them being given the dice. Oh my god, that was a splash page.
Thank you so much.
It's like Stephanie's cool. It's like Stephanie's choices are. Do you want to talk about the rain scene?
Not really, do it.
No,
You're the one who shows it all the time.
So it's like Stephanie was saying, like for her, it's like what, rougher or rawer.
Yeah, because I actually did this double very fast, and I kept thinking during the whole time I was doing the rest of the comic. I never do the whole comic in the regular way, I don't start with one and I don't end with the last page. Usually, I try to put it in, just to have an equal quality during the whole thing. And when I did this thing, I was thinking I will go back to it later, but I never did actually. I felt like I should maybe, but I didn't want to.
Yeah, those pages have so much emotional energy. That's the thing. It's like the fact it's like it's stuff you do in the strokes of red and the colour and the moments you're choosing. But it's kind of like a lot like the atmosphere really, really brings up the emotions bit.
Yeah, and they are the only pages that actually have like, I would say, vivid colours from the whole part that is like in the real world. Because this is the moment where the barrier between words is thinning.
Yeah, I mean, you see so much about like Ash's response to the getting the dice, isn't it? It's that kind of like, oh no, he's in a moment of extreme emotion here, and it's presented like that. Yeah, I'm really,
that's
we're pleased.
Really heightened, really gorgeous. One of the other things is that like because of the you guys invented this like role playing game notion where like they have an agreement called like a GIS where they're not allowed to talk about what had happened. And it made me think about, like, as a teenager, like, there's just, and then becoming an adult as well, like, there's certain things you cannot talk about with the adults. And that's, like, sort of part of the agreement of being a young person.
True.
And then, of course, now they are the adults. I don't know. I just thought that was a parallel. It was probably a deliberate piece there. But
it's interesting. I mean, obviously, Gias is, obviously, it's an Irish term about, it does basically what it happens in the comic. It's a compulsion of something you can't break. Isn't it? You've got something you've got to do. So it's like it. But you're right. Like the mashing up of like fantasy tropes and metaphorical things about life is certainly there in the book. I mean, issue 2, when you get to it, it's like issue 1. We've deliberately, this is our pitch. Like, this is kind of the book. This is the emotional tone. These are the characters, who they are. That, you know, the core of it. And issue 2 is kind of like what we do. Like, issue 2 is like a sampling plate, as in, here is the scene where something like this happens. Here's the scene where this happens. I mean, you don't get that every issue, but, like, here is, you know...
Yeah, the whole thing is there.
Yeah, this is the palette. And then, of course, issue 3 is actually the remaining colour we don't use. As in, issue 3 is its own colour, and that's the other thing we do. So, like, by the end of issue 2, actually, who said it? It was the Polygon writer, Alex Spencer, said... by the end of issue 2, you think you know what you think you know what die is, as in you've got a pretty good idea what the book is. And issue 3 is the no, you don't know what die is, as in like kind of like as in it's also this, as in because issue 3 is this, as I say, it's the Tolkien issue, and it's got this very strong singular take, and then issue 4 ends up going where it does. But that kind of, we're very much interested in like introducing the palettes and bringing the ideas in. And the reason why I mentioned that is when you're saying in terms of like the secrets of childhood and the chaos of the players are kind of analogous. That's kind of the sort of thing. Like there's bits where the fantasy, their real world fantasies impact the fantasy they're going through. And there's other bits where it's about the remainder of things they did coming back to haunt them when they're in this fantasy world. And as well, of course, issue 2 is also let's meet the character classes and see what they can do.
cool.
So it's like issue 2, we get the pop thrill of it of actually saying, okay, what can Godbinders actually do?
Do you actually think about the 3 first issues as a whole? Because I actually asked you to give me a bunch of
scripts,
in the same time. Like at first, I wanted to have 6.
Just end of the arc 5, I think we were going.
Yeah, I know. But the thing is, because it takes a toll for me to change from roughs to finish. I wanted to do the whole sketching before starting. So I was wondering if you actually designed the 3 first scripts as a whole or as one issue.
I know, I do. When I'm thinking about arcs, I know the arc. Especially when you're starting a series, it's like, okay, what do I need to say in each issue and what they want to do? So it's kind of like, I knew that issue 1 is like, anything which doesn't have to be in issue 1, I don't put in issue 1. Like, is a kind of like I say it's the core pictures, and this is what we want to like sell you as a hard word, but you know, as in I want to welcome you in, this is what I'm about. And issue 2 is almost, as I said, always here's what else we are. Then issue 3 is where it actually is kind of like, okay, we've established all that, and issue 3 is showing that and we're the ambition of the book, I guess. Like issue 2 kind of shows what sort of issue 2 is like lots of interesting and like. Some, like I think Clayton said it's like the most horrible scene he's ever lettered one of the bits. Yeah, which is saying a lot for Clayton. Clayton letters Redlands, Clayton letters like Mr. Miracle. What else does he letter? But like, you know, some pretty serious books. And it's a pretty horrible scene. But like, and issue 3 is much about like the I had a friend one of the people who've read it said, you know, those unwritten issues where they really go for a big swing, all those bits of Sandman, they kind of like, they do a kind of format breaker. Issue 3 is kind of like that. Like,
I love issue 3.
Yeah, issue 3 is one of my favourite things I've ever done. There's definitely kills on it. And also, the thing, issue 3 is, I said, it's very serious and it's emotional and it makes me cry. But it's also like, I said, I promised Stephanie a dragon to draw. I said, I'll promise you a dragon by issue 3. And so issue 3 gets a Stephanie Hans dragon, which is amazing.
Like,
that's exciting.
Dragon.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, I'm sure that's a lot of the appeal for doing fantasy as a painter, right?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just really cool to do. I always wanted to paint fantasy, or more like I always felt like I should paint fantasy, but I didn't want to because I thought it was not too easy, but it would be too easy to just focus on what I wanted to draw and skip the serious, like quote mark, serious stuff. You know, I wanted to be able to do the whole thing and then come back to fantasy.
It's I forgot to say, isn't it, the planning, like, I don't think it arcs, as in, like, this is what this arc's about, so I know to the end of Die, as in, this arc is about this and these things happen, and this is what the characters grow from, they change. But there's also a lot of room for, like, improvisation along the way. I know the titles for each arc now, actually, which I'm excited by. Yeah. As in, that I normally, like, with Wick Dip, I only knew that near the end, as in, I wasn't 100% sure about the final arc until we did it. But with Die, I always knew, like, okay, those 3 are the intros, as in that's... by issue 3, you kind of know, not everything we do, but the core of it. And issue 4 and 5 is when the plot kicks back into high gear, as in, like, that kind of... And then we build towards a climax. Like, issue 4 is the kind of, what the actual nature of the book, it becomes apparent. And issue 5, it's
quite the monster.
Yeah. Issue 5 is like, oh no, this is what we're really doing. And you kind of realise how the book is going to operate for another X number of issues. I mean, remember reading Wick Dip? I saw people towards the end of Rising Action or Force Fark when they're going to hunt down an Ankh. And people think, how on earth they can continue from this? This is clearly the last arc. And then you see how we end that fourth arc. And people, oh right, that's how they're going to continue it, because this is clearly this is awful.
Right.
And that we're kind of like that. As at the end of each arc is kind of like, oh right, this is the new status quo. And that's how I tend to think. As in, every arc should create a new status. Not should, but I like to think it, because I like novels, and like the idea of, like, so I like thinking about my work as novels. So like all ongoings are like one very large meta novel, but the individual chapters which are collected means I want them to be a meaningful aesthetic chunk of story. So, like, when you pick up, like, Die's first volume or Die's second volume, or, it's like, here is something that hangs together with a theme and payoff and, like, builds together. And then when you read them all together, it has a different effect. And also when you read individual issues, it has different effects. It's kind of like the Russian nesting doll model. Whew. That's a lot of words.
No, it's fabulous. I really thank you. So, are there any particular RPG systems that you guys are playing now or have recently played that you would want to recommend to our listeners if they wanted to try something while they're waiting patiently for your new RPG?
There is no time in my life for a game in any case. I don't even have a television.
Wow.
I'm working, going to the swimming pool, and sometimes having the occasional drink with friends.
Yeah, conversely, I'm very lazy, and I suppose it's absolutely research now is the thing. Last year, in fact 2 years ago, it's 2 years ago now, it was basically when I was researching Die, me and a few friends, we did a group, and it was basically playing short campaigns of games, like one-offs or like no more than 4 episodes, and we played a lot of games, and so it was basically kind of get a grounding of where the form is now. So the campaign I'm presently running is a game called Legacy, actually Legacy 2, I forgot its sequel, but it's basically a kind of post-apocalyptic game where it plays across 2 levels, where you generate a world between the players, because it's like an apocalypse world game, which is one of the popular ways people do narrative games at the moment, where you generate this world where the world's ended for some reason, and then everybody plays like tribes, families they're called, and they're basically so one people might be the Mad Max biker warrior sorts, and the other people might be like the trader sorts, and then you've got the weirder classes, like basically the Terminators, and you've got aliens who've been crashed on Earth. And then you're playing all these at the tribe level and the political interaction. And then you zoom in and play the hero of that tribe, which you also get to define between another 13 classes. And so you go between these kind of individual heroic stories where they interact, occasionally helping, occasionally against each other. And then you pull out and do the kind of Game of Thrones interaction at the world scale. And that's really interesting. And it's desperately overambitious. And I'm quite enjoying that. I'm also going to run a Lovecraft. I'm going to run Trailer Cthulhu. I've never ran a horror game ever. And that's something I want to run after Christmas. Oh, and Monster Hots. Monster Hots 2 by Avery Adler is an amazing game about queer teenage monsters. Basically, it's think about stuff like Ginger Snaps. Like, you would love... I will buy it for you. Actually, I regularly buy Monster Hots for critics in terms of you really should like this. And it's basically it's all basically using monsterdom as a queer teenage sexuality, kind of examining themselves. And it's really smart, and it's it's halfway between Ginger. It can play anywhere between Ginger Snaps and Buffy, anywhere along that axis. In fact, even considerably further than Ginger Snaps. But yeah, it's a hell of a game. I love it.
Oh wow, I'm gonna have to check that out. Thank you. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. Do you want to just shout out? I know, Stephanie, like, this is probably consuming every waking moment. I know how all-encompassing making art as a painter is. But if there's anything you want to shout out that folks should be checking out that you're creating in addition, and also where they can find you online to see all your work and give you all the money.
Oh, well, no, I'm good, really. You can go on my website, but the title is in French, so you just have to type my name. You will find me.
Yes.
And you're also on Twitter as Hans,
Yeah.
Hans Stephanie.
Yeah, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I actually have 2 Instagram, one for the travels and one for the art. And website, which is the proper way to contact me for job offers, but I don't want more. Thank you.
Yes, if anyone offers any more work, it's like no. I'm gonna leave her alone. She's drawing die.
Yeah, for real. And Kieron, you have a lot of stuff coming out.
Yeah, it's busy. Still on Star Wars, which I'm heading towards the end of my run. It's a big climax, which is good. Wick Div is coming to a close. I have a few issues left to write, but it's issue 41 came out this week. Sorry, issue 40 came out this week, and issue 45 is the final issue, probably out in June. I'm doing a book called Peter Cannon Thunderbolt with Dynamite, which is a revival of the 1960s character, 1960s Charlton character, who's primarily known as being the inspiration for Ozymandias. And this is me doing a kind of imagine it's me being very playful and trying to do a state-of-the-art superhero comic with an agreeably aggressive team of people who want to be interesting. It's fun and audacious. It's it's a bit it's the closest thing I've done to Young Avengers since Young Avengers. Even Wick Div wasn't really like Young Avengers.
No,
in terms of the formal playfulness and about superheroes. It just happens. It stars much older people. It's I keep on saying the main influence on Peter Cannon's design is Dream Daddy, the video game. So it's very much we're heavily into that. But and that kind of troublesome, slightly mischievous attitude that kind of percolated Young Avengers, that's very much in there. And so I think people be it's the sort of thing people pick up issue 1 and go, oh right, this is what's happening, and then they'll go, okay, what's Kieron and the rest of them going to do now? So that's fun. And Die, and that's it. I mean, basically, Die, Uber's on hold a bit while they're trying to sort out how to do the last 4 issues. And I'm doing one other thing that hasn't been announced yet, which is a mini. Which sounds like a lot, but by this time next year, I will just be doing Die. Everything else will be done. Yeah.
Unless I'm dead.
Unless you're dead. No, I will basically resurrect you as I will be basically a lich-esque creature that you will not sleep, until you will not rest in the eternal grave.
Yeah, it's true. My dual projects will be making sure Ruth Bader Ginsburg doesn't die and keeping Stephanie Hans alive. So those are good projects for me.
I'm pretty much in favor of keeping Stephanie Hans alive.
Yes, you're basically Anna. You're now the guardian of civilization. These 2 women must live.
That's not unfamiliar to me at all. No.
Yes.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. And and Kieron, of course, obviously you have your. Oh my God, Tumblr is ending. Are you gonna? Well, I guess you're gonna. What are you gonna do? I was gonna say everybody should check out your Tumblr for Meta. But Tumblr is basically done. Yeah,
I just made a joke about this, but yeah, Tumblr's censorious black hole is an amazing thing.
No, it's not really dying, is it?
It probably will. I definitely you haven't followed. I'll talk about this when we get offline.
Because I saw that they installed a new policy against porn. Is it why it's dying?
It's kind of. It's they're just not doing it very well. Is the best way. This is a much longer conversation.
Yeah, I don't want to get too onto that. But I
sorry.
guess for now we can read your meta analysis of your work on Tumblr for the time being.
Yeah, it's annoying because the thing about it is if Tumblr genuinely, it's a really useful thing for just basically tagging and doing low level blogging. If I had to go back to WordPress, that's a lot of work.
It is.
So I'm probably dialing back my appearance on Tumblr, but it's certainly useful. Die's got a site if people are interested. It's called diecomic.com, that's basically a centralised link place, and it's designed to just give the information you need. I'm on Twitter, Kieron Gillen, and I mainly make puns. That's kind of what I do. And retweet reviews.
Thank you both. I'm so happy to be doing this. Really loving this comic. It's definitely on my best of list, no question. And I couldn't be more excited for the RPG too. So thank you very much. And thank you to our listeners. Our next episode is going to be about the new She-Ra cartoon. I've got some amazing critics coming on to join me. I promise, cartoonness, queerness, enthusiasm. And so we'll be taping that really soon. And I want to thank everyone for sticking with the show. You can find me on Twitter, ELANA_Brooklyn. That's Ilana_Brooklyn. Obviously, Graphic Policy is at graphicpolicy.com for all your comics, news, information, critical analysis, and more. And thank you for listening to us.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.